This video is about the question, is transsexualism a third gender? Now, I'll give you my answer very quickly. And my answer to that question is no, transsexualism is not a third gender. However, I will qualify that, and I will qualify it with the statement that it is a very reasonable point of view, backed up by a body of evidence, that transsexualism is a third gender. It is simply not a view that I agree with. Now, if we take the Hijras, they are a part of Indian society, a transgender part, a 4,000-year-old culture. Now, they are thought of within Indian culture as being third gender people. And we have that same phenomenon within Hawaiian culture, within it, for example, and within several other cultures of the world. And this third gender perspective is a common way of thinking, and is a common cultural interpretation. And I think it's a very reasonable interpretation. And the one of the main reasons I think it's reasonable is not merely that it's established, but also that there is an evidentiary base there. Now, the reason I think it's not ultimately true relates to the interpretation of the facts. But I think whether it's true or not, I think the thing I would emphasize most strongly is it is a very legitimate perspective, that my interpretation, along with others' interpretation, that transgenderism and transsexualism is, in a sense, a point on the spectrum, and is about the idea of binary gender being inadequate. Those sorts of ideas are the way I'm thinking, the way I'm interpreting the facts. And other people would interpret them in a slightly different way. And I think whenever there is a situation when there is a latitude for interpretation, then I think it's sensible to show respect to many different points of view. And I think it's, let's say there are 3 points of view on an issue. I think if each point of view respects the other points of view, then the other points of view should respect that. Now, I think we've talked in generalities long enough. So let's talk about the third gender point of view. Now, essentially, it's culturally derived. If you think, in particular, of transsexual women, and culturally, their experience in a third gender culture may not follow the male pattern, and they may more closely approximate the female pattern within that culture. They may, for example, assist with child rearing. They may, for example, assist with cooking and cleaning within those stereotypical female activities. Well, those individuals who are part of that culture cross over towards the female gender. And in terms of genetic and biological interpretation, well, when you look at the fact that there is a transsexual gene, well, you are then separating, in the case of transsexual women from men. You are saying that there is a dividing line. Now, from this genetic evidence, we start off with the position that when you start to compare chromosomes, there is the same structure between a transsexual woman and a man initially, when it's not looked at in sufficient detail. Then when we go within the chromosomes and we start to go within the specific transsexual gene, what I refer to as the markers, and I'm not going to discuss protein structures, I'm not going to go into the chromosomes, I'm not going to go into the discussions here. I'm simply going to use the term genetic marker to differentiate chromosomal differences between transsexual women and men. And again, the focus of this page is transsexual women. Now, the interpretation of that chromosomal difference, that could lead to a third gender interpretation. It could lead to the notion that transsexual women are, in essence, part of the way between the male and the female genders. And that is one possible interpretation of that bit of evidence. Equally, in terms of hormonal systems, the endocrine system, and also in terms of MRI brain scans, there is an evidentiary interpretation that that it's reasonable to say that a third gender exists in terms of the interpretation of the facts, and I think it would take a while to discuss the facts in detail in terms of, well, white matter. I think I won't go into the facts at this point. So merely all I'm highlighting at this point is that a third gender interpretation is a possible and a reasonable way. So I think what is important to highlight is it is not a myth that there is the third gender. It's very important. And anyone who dismisses the idea out of hand of the existence of a third gender is entirely mistaken. It's a fundamental, factual, empirical error. Now, I may possibly go into the facts in more detail in a later video, but it is time consuming to go through all this, and it can be Googled. Now, I think I'm trying to stress here the importance of paying respect to the notion of a third gender. Now, I think I've done that. After that, I think it's also important to express one's own point of view on one's own interpretation of the evidence. And I do not think that the existence of a third gender is the correct view. What I feel in terms of the three primary sources of evidence, the transsexual gene, MRI brain scans, and endocrine systems, I feel that all three show that a transsexual woman crosses over from a male into the category female. I think there is a pattern there, and I think that their proper interpretation shows that there is not merely a crossing over so that a transsexual woman is halfway between man and woman. Rather, I think that there is a crossing over all the way into the female gender. And I think when all three pieces of information are put into context, I think that is the proper interpretation. And thinking about this, I really feel that I'm going to have to do some separate videos on getting into this evidence in much more detail. Let's see, what else would I say? Okay, I think I'll stress some points that I've stressed from other videos, which is the non-binary issue. That commonly, without training, without education, with basic schooling or with basic university, one comes to the idea that there is such a thing as a male and there is such a thing as a female, and that there perhaps isn't anything else. Now, the idea of the existence of a binary, the idea of either binary sexes or binary gender, however one wishes to express it, of biological binaries, is incorrect. It is incorrect because that is not what is supported by genetic evidence or biological evidence. That is merely a simple point of view. The genetic definition of biological gender falls to pieces when we start to realize there's more than XX and XY out there. There is XXX, for example, in terms of metafemales. There are a variety of other genetic codes. Then the idea of binary gender starts to fall to pieces, and I think this is one of the strongest issues that destroys the idea of a third gender and replaces it with the idea that gender and also biological gender within gender, also called sex, is a spectrum. That biological gender, sex, and non-biological gender, what I refer to as society, are spectrums, and there is no black and white dividing lines there. A transsexual woman exists on a spectrum, the same as we ordinarily use the term male and we ordinarily use the term female. They exist on a spectrum, and the points at which these people exist on a spectrum is grey and is imprecise. And we have many different people on that spectrum. Genderqueer people, non-binary people, for example, and thousands of categories, thousands of different people and their interpretation, people who don't see themselves as on a spectrum. There are many ways of expressing, many ways of explaining, but what I'm really focusing on, what I'm really stressing, is the idea that there is nothing definitive and definite and fixed and immutable about gender or about sex. That there's nothing that is not able to be changed. The technology for genetic sex change exists today. It's just not commonly known, but it's within a few mouse clicks, it's within you Googling. The details are on the internet. The details are in existence, the papers are out there. And I think once you understand that binary gender simply can't be defended, once you accept that argument, then the idea of transsexuals being a third gender it does basically fall to pieces. And although there is evidence and there is a case there, I think ultimately that case and that evidence is not supported. That the way that transsexual women, much as transgender people, can properly be understood is as part of a spectrum. We could equally say, well, a spectrum from A to B or a spectrum from man to woman doesn't describe it, and that it's not a two-dimensional spectrum, that it's a multi-dimensional spectrum. We wouldn't even say it's 3 or 4 dimensions. It's something where a person occupies a point of change, a differential. It's something where we are pointing out that there is no fixed point, that all points are fluid in a sense. Now, I'm not taking the position that everyone's gender fluid. What I'm saying instead is there are a rainbow of different genders, a rainbow of different sexualities, and understanding the existence of that rainbow really gives a response to the idea of there being a third gender as, well, that is one understanding, but it is a limited understanding, and a better understanding is what could be expressed as a view that we're all part of a rainbow. Well, I think that's the best I can do at this point in terms of explaining that, and I know it's not wonderful, but I hope that might have helped someone. Thank you.